My name is Evelyn, and I am 73 years old. For most of my life, I believed I had done what any loving mother would do. I raised my only child, stood beside my husband through every struggle, and spent decades building a secure future for our family. I never imagined that one evening at my son's engagement party would force me to question everything I believed about him. But before I tell you what happened that night, you need to understand how we got there. My husband, Harold, died 8 years ago after a sudden heart attack. He collapsed in our kitchen one Tuesday morning, his coffee cup still in his hand. The doctors said it happened quickly. They said he probably didn't suffer. I wanted to believe them. Harold and I had been married for 40 years. We met at Arizona State University when we were young and had almost nothing. We married at 22 and 23, despite plenty of people telling us we'd never make it. We proved them wrong. Together, we built a life from scratch. Harold dreamed of developing commercial properties around Phoenix. What began as a small idea eventually became a successful business. Over more than 3 decades, we purchased property after property until we owned 12 commercial buildings throughout Phoenix and Scottsdale. By the time Harold died, those properties generated nearly $30,000 every month. But Harold had thought about more than money. He had thought about our son, Julian. Before his death, Harold established a trust worth roughly $4 million. He arranged for me to control it during my lifetime, with Julian eventually receiving the inheritance. One evening, about 2 years before Harold died, he sat beside me and spoke very seriously. "Evelyn, I need you to promise me something." "What is it?" "If I die before you, don't let Julian pressure you into giving him access to everything before he's ready." I smiled. "He's a good man." "I know he's your son," Harold said. "That's exactly why I'm asking. You'll want to help him because you love him. But I've seen what happens when people receive too much money too soon." He squeezed my hand. "Promise me you'll use your judgment, not just your heart." I promised. At the time, I never imagined I'd actually have to make that choice. After Harold died, Julian and I became even closer. He was 30 years old when his father passed away, and for several years it felt like the two of us were learning how to live without Harold together. Julian came to my house nearly every Sunday. We ate dinner, talked about his work, and discussed his hopes for the future. He worked as a project manager for a technology company and often talked about eventually starting a consulting business. I thought we were close. Then, about a year before the engagement party, everything changed. Julian called me one Thursday afternoon. "Mom, I met someone." I could hear the excitement in his voice. "Someone special?" "Yes. Her name is Sabrina. I want you to meet her." He told me they had been dating for about 3 months. That surprised me. Julian had always told me about the important things happening in his life. Why had he waited so long? Still, I pushed the concern aside. Maybe he wanted to make sure the relationship was serious first. The first time Sabrina came to Sunday dinner, I noticed several things. She was dressed in expensive designer clothing. Her shoes, handbag, and jewelry were clearly costly. But that wasn't what made me uncomfortable. It was the way she looked around my house. She studied the paintings Harold had collected. She examined the antique furniture. She asked questions about the age and value of several items. At one point, she touched an antique cabinet. "This looks original," she said. "It is," I answered. "Harold and I bought it decades ago. It's probably worth quite a bit." Then she moved on. During dinner, I tried asking about her family, education, and work. Her answers were vague. She quickly redirected the conversation toward Julian. After she left, Julian looked at me with an excited smile. "She's amazing, isn't she?" I smiled back. "Yes, sweetheart." I didn't tell him what I was thinking. Over the next few months, Sabrina became a constant presence in his life. Julian began missing our Sunday dinners. When he did visit, Sabrina was usually beside him. Then came the first request for money. Julian told me they wanted to start a consulting company together. "We need about $200,000, Sabrina said. I looked at my son. I remembered Harold's promise. "I'll consider helping," I said. "But I need to see the business plan first." Sabrina's expression tightened. "$50,000 won't be enough. Then perhaps the business needs to begin smaller," I replied. Nobody spoke for several seconds. I could feel something changing between us, and I had no idea that this was only the beginning. After that conversation, Julian's visits became less frequent. At first, I tried not to take it personally. I told myself he was busy. He had a demanding job, a new relationship, and plans for a business, but the change was obvious. Whenever I called, he seemed distracted. Mom, Sabrina and I are working on the business. Or, we're looking at office spaces. It was always Sabrina and I, never just Julian anymore. Then, 3 months later, he called with news. Mom, I proposed. I forced myself to sound happy. Congratulations, sweetheart. Sabrina said yes. We're getting married. I told him how pleased I was, even though something inside me felt uneasy. Then he mentioned the engagement party. Sabrina's parents are hosting it at their country club. They're covering the venue, but there are other expenses. Catering, flowers, drinks. He paused. Mom, could you contribute $20,000? I was stunned. $20,000? For an engagement party? Please. It's important to Sabrina. She wants everything to be perfect. I took a breath. I can contribute $10,000. Silence, then Julian finally said, I'll tell her. He ended the call without saying goodbye. I should have understood then that something was wrong. Instead, I kept making excuses for him. I told myself he was simply caught up in the excitement of getting married. The engagement party was held on a Saturday evening in October. I spent most of the week deciding what to wear. Eventually, I chose a simple navy dress. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would draw attention away from the couple. I also bought Sabrina a gift. I had a jeweler make a platinum bracelet with small diamonds. It cost $3,000, which was more than I could comfortably spend. But I wanted to welcome her into our family. I arrived at the country club shortly after the party began. The ballroom looked beautiful. White flowers covered nearly every table. Soft golden lights reflected from the walls. A jazz quartet played near the bar while servers carried champagne and expensive appetizers through the room. I immediately spotted Julian. He stood beside Sabrina. She wore a tight white dress that looked more appropriate for a nightclub than an engagement celebration. When she noticed me, she leaned toward Julian and whispered something. He turned toward me. For a moment, I saw irritation on his face, then he forced a smile. I walked over. Congratulations again, sweetheart. I opened my arms to hug him. Before I could reach him, Sabrina stepped between us. Evelyn, you made it. She smiled. We were beginning to wonder if you would come. I felt the first sting. Not we're so happy you're here. Not welcome. Instead, she made my arrival sound like an inconvenience. Of course I came, I replied. I handed her the gift bag. This is for you. I hope you like it. She opened it immediately. When she saw the bracelet, her expression barely changed. Oh, jewelry. She lifted it from the box for only a second. How traditional. Then she handed it to Julian. Hold this for me. She turned toward another group of guests. I stood there feeling foolish. Julian didn't defend me. He didn't even thank me. He simply held the box while Sabrina walked away. I tried to mingle with the guests, but I knew almost no one. Most of Sabrina's friends were young, wealthy, and dressed in designer clothing. They spoke to me politely, but looked at me as though I were someone from another generation who had wandered into the wrong room. Then I met Sabrina's parents. Her father, Gerald, gave me a brief handshake. So you're Julian's mother. His tone was strangely formal. Her mother, Marianne, looked me up and down. That's a lovely dress, she said. I smiled. Thank you. Department store? Yes. She nodded. How quaint. Then she walked away. I swallowed my embarrassment. I kept telling myself that this evening wasn't about me. It was about my son, so I tried again. Later, I found Julian standing with Sabrina and several of her friends. I touched his arm. Maybe we could have dinner next Sunday. Just the three of us. I'd really like to spend some time with Sabrina before the wedding planning gets too busy. Sabrina laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. Sunday dinner. Her friends looked at one another. Julian, you never told me your mother still expects those weekly dinners, she smiled. How old-fashioned. They're just something we've always done, I said. Sabrina tilted her head. Well, that's something you used to do. Her voice became louder. Julian is building a new life now. He has a business to work on, a wedding to plan, and a future with me. I looked at my son. He said nothing, Sabrina continued. He doesn't have time for obligatory family dinners anymore. A few people laughed. My face grew hot. I only want to spend time with my son. That's the problem, she replied. Her smile disappeared. Sometimes you don't know when to let go. The room seemed to become strangely quiet. Everyone nearby was listening. Then Sabrina said the words that finally shattered whatever hope I had left. Julian has told me how controlling you've been, how you've interfered with his relationships and tried to make decisions for him. I turned toward my son. Is that true? Julian looked embarrassed. But he wasn't embarrassed by what Sabrina had said. He was embarrassed by me. Mom, he said quietly, you're making a scene. I stared at him. I'm making a scene? His expression hardened. I think you should leave. For a moment I couldn't breathe. This was my son, the little boy I had comforted when he was sick, the child whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the young man whose heartbreaks I had cried over. And now he was asking me to leave his engagement party. You're embarrassing me, he said. Sabrina stood beside him with a faint smile. That was when something inside me finally broke. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply turned around and walked out. But as I crossed the ballroom, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Harold had warned me about this, and for the first time, I wondered whether protecting my son might mean doing something he would hate me for. The drive home from the country club was a blur. My hands shook so badly that I had to pull over twice before I reached home. I kept hearing Julian's voice in my head. You're embarrassing me. Please leave. When I finally arrived, I sat in my driveway for nearly 20 minutes. The house was completely dark. For the first time since Harold died, it felt less like a home and more like an empty building filled with memories. I went inside, changed clothes, and sat in Harold's old leather chair. It was the chair he had used every evening for years. The leather was cracked, and the cushion had molded to the shape of his body. I closed my eyes. What am I supposed to do? I whispered. There was no answer. But then I remembered Harold's warning. Don't let Julian pressure you. Don't let someone else control his inheritance. I began thinking about everything that had happened since Sabrina entered our lives. Her questions about my belongings, her interest in the value of our property, the business proposal, the escalating requests for money, Julian's sudden distance from me, and now the humiliation at the engagement party. It didn't feel accidental anymore. It felt deliberate. Around 3 a.m, I walked into Harold's old office and opened the drawer where I kept the trust documents. I read them carefully. Harold had been extremely specific. Julian would eventually inherit the money, but he wouldn't receive unrestricted control until he reached 45, unless I determined earlier that he was financially responsible. More importantly, one section caught my attention. If I had reasonable grounds to believe Julian was being manipulated by someone concerning the trust, I had the authority to restrict distributions until I believed the influence had ended. Harold had planned for exactly this kind of situation. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Paul, the attorney who had worked with Harold for 20 years. I need to see you Monday morning. It's urgent. His reply came within minutes. 8 o'clock. Is everything all right? I stared at the screen. No, but it will be. Sunday came and went. I kept waiting for Julian to call. I expected an apology. Maybe a simple message saying he was sorry. Nothing came, not one call. Not one text. The silence hurt more than the argument. Monday morning, I walked into Paul's office at 8. He took one look at my face and immediately poured me a cup of coffee. Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about Sabrina. I explained the money requests and what had happened at the engagement party. Most importantly, I told him why I believed Julian was no longer making decisions freely. Paul listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back. You want to restrict access to the trust? Yes. You understand what that could do to your relationship with Julian? I nodded. He may never forgive you. Our relationship is already damaged, I said quietly. But if I give him access now, I believe Sabrina could convince him to spend everything. Paul studied me for several seconds. Then he opened the trust documents. You have authority to act. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing everything. By the time I left his office, the trust was locked down. Julian could not receive distributions without my written approval. I drove home feeling strangely calm. I knew what was coming. I just didn't know how quickly it would happen. The next morning, at exactly 8:15, my phone rang. Julian. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. Mom. His voice was tense. I need access to the trust. No greeting. No apology. Nothing about the party. Why? Sabrina and I found a building for the consulting company. We have to move quickly. The seller wants proof of funds. How much? $500,000. I closed my eyes. $500,000. The original request had been $200,000. Now they wanted $500,000. For a building? It's an investment, Mom. Julian, I don't think this is about building a business. I think this is about Sabrina getting access to your inheritance. His voice immediately hardened. That isn't fair. What happened at the party wasn't fair either. You're still upset about that? Yes. You were being clingy, Mom. Sabrina was right to call you out. I felt something inside me go cold. Did you really mean what you said that night? He didn't answer. I continued. You allowed her to humiliate me in front of everyone. Mom, and now you're asking me for $500,000. It's my inheritance. No, I said calmly. It's money your father placed in a trust. I am the trustee. You can't keep my money from me. I can, and I have. Silence. Then his voice became angry. You spoke to Paul. Yes. You locked me out. I protected the trust. You're trying to control me. No, Julian. I'm trying to protect you. I'm 38 years old. Then act like it. The words left my mouth before I could soften them. He became quiet. I took a breath. Julian, I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because right now, I don't believe you're making this decision freely. You don't know Sabrina. Maybe I don't. But you don't know what she means to me. I know one thing, I replied. If she truly loves you, she won't need access to your father's money to stay with you. He didn't respond, so I asked softly, will she leave you if the money isn't available? His silence told me more than words could. Then he whispered, I can't believe you're doing this. His voice turned cold. You've lost your son. Julian, don't call me. Don't text me. We're done. The line went dead. I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the phone. My heart was shattered. But I knew I had kept the promise I made to Harold, and now all I could do was wait and see what happened next. The first few days after Julian's phone call were the hardest I had ever experienced. I kept reaching for my phone out of habit. Every time it buzzed, my heart jumped. Maybe it was Julian. Maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe he was ready to apologize, but the phone never showed his name. I tried to keep myself busy. I cleaned the house from top to bottom. I reorganized the pantry. I worked in the garden until my knees hurt. Anything was better than sitting alone and replaying the engagement party in my head. Still, doubt crept in. What if I had been wrong? What if Sabrina really loved Julian? What if I had destroyed my son's chance at happiness simply because I couldn't accept that he was building a life without me? Those thoughts haunted me at night. Then I would remember Sabrina's expression at the party, that cold smile, the way she had looked at my home, the questions about money, the sudden request for $500,000. And I would remind myself why I had acted. I hadn't locked the trust because I wanted control. I had locked it because Harold had trusted me to protect it. 2 days later, my phone finally rang. Julian. I answered immediately. Hello, sweetheart. There was silence, then his voice came through. Mom. He sounded completely different, not angry, not defensive. Broken. Sabrina left me. I closed my eyes. I had expected that possibility, but hearing it from my son still hurt. What happened? After you restricted the trust, I told her we could still make the business work. I told her the restriction might only be temporary. His voice trembled. She didn't care. I didn't interrupt. She said she couldn't be with a man who let his mother control him. She called me weak. She said she had wasted a year of her life on someone who didn't have the courage to stand up for what belonged to him. He stopped. She packed her things and left that afternoon. I swallowed. The engagement is over. I wanted to tell him I had warned him. I wanted to remind him of every conversation we had, but he was my son, and he was hurting, so I simply said, I'm sorry. There was a long silence. Then Julian asked the question I knew had been coming. "Were you right about her?" I didn't answer immediately. He continued. "Was it always about the money?" His voice cracked. "Did she ever really love me?" I took a slow breath. "I don't know what was in her heart, Julian. I can't tell you whether she ever loved you," he began crying. "But I do know this. Genuine love doesn't disappear the moment money becomes unavailable." He said nothing. "Someone who truly wants to build a life with you will stand beside you when things become difficult. They won't walk away because they can't get access to an inheritance." "I feel so stupid," he whispered. "You're not stupid. I ignored everything. You were in love. I saw the warning signs, Mom. I saw them. I just didn't want to admit what they meant." That sentence broke my heart. He had finally seen what I had been afraid to say. "I just wanted someone to love me," he said. "I thought she did. You deserve to be loved for who you are," I told him. "Not for what you might inherit." He cried quietly. Then came the words I had been hoping to hear. "I'm sorry." I closed my eyes. "For what? For everything." His voice shook. "The party, the things I said, the way I treated you. I should have defended you. I should have listened." I felt tears running down my cheeks. "You hurt me badly, Julian." "I know, but you're still my son." He began crying harder. "Can I come over?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Can we have dinner?" "Yes." "Sunday?" I smiled through my tears. "Come home." That Sunday, Julian walked through my front door. For a moment, neither of us knew what to say. Then he hugged me. It wasn't the quick, distracted hug he'd given me in recent months. It was the kind of hug he used to give me as a child when he was frightened or hurt. I held him tightly. Neither of us pretended everything was fixed. There were too many things we needed to discuss, too many wounds. But for the first time in months, we were sitting on the same side of the table again. We talked for hours. Julian told me things he had been afraid to admit. He told me Sabrina had slowly convinced him that his relationship with me was unhealthy. She made him feel guilty for spending time with me. She made our Sunday dinners seem childish. And every conversation about his future eventually returned to money. He finally understood what I had been seeing. After dinner, he looked at me. "Mom, I don't want you to unlock the trust yet." I stared at him. "You don't?" "No." He shook his head. "I need to prove something to myself." "What?" "That I can build a future without relying on Dad's money." My heart filled with relief. "I want to start my business someday," he continued. "But if I can't build it without an inheritance, maybe I'm not ready to build it." I smiled. "That sounds like your father talking." Julian laughed softly. "I think I finally understand why Dad trusted you." He stood and hugged me again. "Thank you for protecting me." I held him close. "Even when you hated me," he nodded. "Especially then, and for the first time since the engagement party, I believed my son might truly be finding his way back to himself." That Sunday became the beginning of something new. Julian didn't suddenly become the son he had been before Sabrina. Healing didn't happen overnight. There were still difficult conversations. There were moments when I could see the shame in his eyes when he remembered how he'd treated me. There were moments when I struggled with my own anger. But we were trying. And sometimes trying is the first step toward forgiveness. Over the following weeks, Julian began coming to dinner every Sunday again. The first few dinners felt awkward. We didn't know what subjects were safe, so we talked about ordinary things: his work, my garden, books, the weather, anything that didn't reopen the wounds. Eventually, laughter returned to the house. One evening, Julian helped me prepare dinner. He chopped vegetables while I worked on the main dish. For a moment, I looked across the kitchen and saw the little boy he had once been. The same child who used to sit at the counter doing his homework. The same boy who would run into my arms whenever something frightened him. I realized that child hadn't completely disappeared. He had simply gotten lost. And perhaps now he was finding his way home. A few weeks later, Julian surprised me with another conversation about the trust. "Mom," he said, "I don't want you to give me access yet." I looked at him carefully. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He took a breath. I spent too much time believing that Dad's money was the answer to everything. He looked down at his hands. I thought if I had the money, I could prove I was successful. I thought it would make me more attractive to people. More important, you don't need money to prove your worth. I know that now. He smiled sadly. I want to build something myself. I reached across the table and took his hand. Then do it. He squeezed my fingers. And when the time comes, I want you to decide whether I'm ready. I smiled. That is exactly what your father wanted. For the first time, Julian didn't argue. He understood. Harold hadn't created the trust because he didn't trust his son. He created it because he knew people could make terrible decisions when money became more important than judgment. And perhaps most importantly, he had trusted me to recognize the difference between helping Julian and enabling him. Months passed. Julian started rebuilding his life. He focused on his career and began developing his business ideas slowly. Without borrowing from the trust, he also became more independent. He stopped looking for someone else to rescue him. He stopped measuring his future by what his father had left behind. And I began learning something too. Being a mother doesn't mean protecting your child from every mistake. Sometimes you have to let them make mistakes. But there are moments when love requires you to stand in the doorway and say, "No farther." That was what I had done. I had been afraid Julian would hate me forever. Instead, the experience forced him to look honestly at his life. One Sunday evening, as he prepared to leave, he hugged me at the front door. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For being strong when I wasn't." My eyes filled with tears. I didn't feel strong. He smiled. "You were." After he left, I stood in the doorway watching his car disappear down the street. I thought about Harold. I wondered what he would say if he could see us now. I imagined him sitting in his old chair, smiling that quiet smile he always had whenever he knew something I didn't. Maybe he had understood all along. Maybe that's why he made me promise. Because love isn't always about giving someone what they want. Sometimes love is refusing to give them something that could destroy them. I still don't know what would have happened if I had released that $500,000. Perhaps Julian and Sabrina would have built a successful business. Perhaps they would have stayed together. Or perhaps she would have taken the money and eventually left him with nothing. I'll never know. What I do know is that when the choice came, I protected my son's future rather than protecting his feelings. And that decision cost me his trust for a while. But eventually, it helped him find his way back. Today, our Sunday dinners continue. They're not perfect. Sometimes we disagree. Sometimes old wounds still hurt, but we're together. And that's something I will never take for granted again. I've learned that being a mother doesn't end when your child becomes an adult. The role simply changes. You stop holding their hand while they cross the street. Instead, you stand nearby and hope they remember what you taught them. And when they lose their way, sometimes the greatest gift you can give them isn't money, advice, or rescue. Sometimes it's simply the courage to say no, even when they hate you for it, even when it breaks your heart, because real love isn't always comfortable. Sometimes real love means becoming the villain in someone's story long enough to keep them from destroying their own future. And if I had to make that choice again, knowing how painful it would be, I would still do it. Because I'm Julian's mother, and I will always choose his future over his temporary happiness.